I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Paramang people. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present.
There's a couple of sayings around old vines to say, are they good because they're old or old because they're good? In the case of us, I think they're old because they're good. They're not just there because, they've just managed to hang out there for that long. They do need their maintenance, and they need, and they certainly benefit from all the inputs that we do. And I think that's the really exciting thing.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Jules Ashmead was born into the Campbells family of Rutherglen. Today, her path in wine is solidified between two sacred places, the Rutherglen, where she is fifth-generation winemaker at Campbells Winery, and in the Barossa Valley as head of production at Elderton Wines. Hi, Jules. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Shanteh. Thank you for including me on your program.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I was going to ask you, how is life? But then I thought that's kind of a crazy question, because I take it that just busy is how most of your life is.
Yeah, it is busy. There's no doubt about that. But for a start, I've got to say, I work with two great teams, one in Rutherglen at Campbells and the other here at Elderton, which is where I'm home based. So if it wasn't without my team in both spots, it wouldn't happen. So I've got the busy role for sure, but also the great role of being able to see, two beautiful parts of the world often and flip between the two. So it's busy, but it's great.
I thought that, nothing works on your own. You always have to have an amazing team, but you also have three children. And I just thought, two wineries, three children, is that kind of like looking after five babies 24/7?
Yeah, and I have a husband too, so that's like a sixth.
Definitely.
No, I'd love to say my kids, can do everything for themselves, but it's not the case. But it's funny. I think the vintage period is crazy, as we winemakers and viticulturalists know. But then we have this wonderful time like now when everything sort of settles down a little bit and we can actually regroup and remember what our kids look like and, and what family life was before vintage hit. And so it's kind of, you have these, crazy ups and downs, and then, so it's, it's busy and it's a lot of management, of which I'm not very good at, but somehow we kind of fumble through.
I bet you're better than you think you are. Just for a little bit of context for everyone listening, can you tell me more about growing up as part of Campbell's? I believe that you actually lived right next to the winery. What was your kind of childhood like, and how did you find your way into deciding, yes, winemaking was the path for you?
Yeah, we did. We lived in the homestead, which is right by the winery, and it's called Bobby Burns actually. So that was a beautiful old little red brick cottage. So we lived there for the first 5 years of my life, and I'm the youngest of three girls in our family. And so living next to the winery, we obviously were just in and out of the winery and following Dad and Mum around, who are both involved with the winery. And then we moved from there when I was still pretty young, but literally just up the road, so a kilometre away. So still very much by the winery and next to the vineyards. And so in constant sort of understanding and flow with what's going on in the winery. So, and I think for me, being the youngest of the family, I had this just inherent interest in what Dad was doing at all times. So I just used to follow him around, particularly in the busy times, particularly during vintage, when he'd be, doing special trips down to the winery after school and during the night, just checking bomades and that sort of thing. So I could be his little rouseabout and jump up on top of tanks if we were pumping stuff around or whatever we were doing. So for me, it was just a really a natural sort of position to be in, to be involved in the winery. And then I guess getting older during holidays and that sort of thing, I'd just help out in the lab and just be a part of what was going on. And of course, we have a bottling line. So Campbell's is a pretty sort of a from the ground up operation where we grow grapes, make the wine and bottle all on site. So there was a lot of facets to be involved with as a part of Campbell's growing up. And so for me, it was just a destination from the beginning. I just knew that I always wanted to be involved with wine. I loved the fact that, you'd be out in the vineyard, you'd see the grapes growing and then you'd get to follow them all the way through. I mean, it's a pretty magic situation to be involved with.
Mm. Definitely. And such an institution of a winery and so important for Australian history. Must be pretty amazing to be part of that heritage and legacy. But it sounds like you had a pretty good relationship with your dad. Was it more that you wanted to kind of help him out and be around him, or when you were younger, do you think? Or do you think it was more really that you were quite interested in the work itself?
Interesting. Probably a bit of both. I mean, if I wanted to be with my dad, I had to be at the winery because he was pretty much there all the time. So that was kind of, if I wanted to see him, I had to be there. But I think, he just had such a passion for what he did and such drive that I think it was really quite engaging and something that I could almost feel when I was around him. So it was really just a really positive energy, and he just and I hope that we're doing the same thing now at Campbell's, just sort of, with our fortifieds, just pushing on with that dream of just continuing to try and make the best ones we can. And same goes with our table wines as well, obviously. But so I think that if that makes sense, Shanteh, it was just really a pretty sort of exciting environment to be a part of.
Definitely. I mean, I can't even imagine it, to be honest. I mean, my family are teachers, and for love of money, I wasn't that interested in hanging around their schools or TAFEs, to be honest, but I certainly liked my time with them. You then went on after school to do an exchange year in Bordeaux. It's such a place of grandeur, Bordeaux. I cannot imagine debaucherous goon parties over there. What was your exchange year like?
Actually, during that exchange year, I did go camping with a mate once, and we did find a litre bottle of very basic Vin de Bordeaux. So Vin de Bordeaux. So it does exist even over there. But it was amazing, and I think I'd already decided I'd finished school in Australia, so this was like a bit of a gap year, if you like, before going to study, which was my plan. And I just landed in Saint-Emilion. So I was completely blown away right from the beginning. I was with a beautiful family who sold their grapes to the local cooperative at that stage. But my host dad, Michel Grossier, is actually now a bit of a garagiste within Saint-Emilion, and his family are now making their wine. So it was an amazing year. It was tricky because I headed over with sort of French that ended in year 11, so I had to learn pretty quickly. But and I attended a local school over in Montagne as well, which had was like a high school / tech school. So I did some pruning in there in the local sort of vineyard that was attached to this tech school, and it was just it was, in hindsight, it was amazing. At the time, it was tricky but still fun. But like all things when we travel, it would be great to just go back in time and do it again with the knowledge we've got now, because you sort of learn so much more. But it was even then. In the holidays, I did some hand picking for Chateau Moulin Saint Georges, which also has Chateau Ozone, and just to be involved in a beautiful place and seeing some amazing wineries was awesome. And I think for me, it just gave me a real sense of quality, but next level care as well. The sort of the lengths people go to with their 0.33 hectares of vineyard is just extraordinary. And it just gave me a whole new appreciation of how really unique and precious these vines that we have are. So it was a really amazing experience in hindsight, particularly. Yeah.
I can imagine that sense of that meticulous and the seriousness of how passionate they were. And I mean, I think as Aussies, we're just as passionate, but in a more kind of aloof and we just have a different way about us, don't we? So I can imagine it being totally different and just, but also, wow. Yeah. And I can see, you think, oh my gosh, what were we drinking that day, or what were we trying? I want to go back and just experience it all over again. But what an experience to have, especially in a gap year. I mean, most people go on some crazy party buses and such like, but
that would be fun too, I imagine. Or party bus. I didn't get to do that so much, but anyway, hey, there's time for that later.
There's always time for that, and most of the time people don't remember them anyway. So you returned home and you spent some time at Two Hands Winery in Turkey Flat. So straight from I imagine it was straight from Bordeaux. You correct me if I'm wrong, and then into the Barossa. What was the experience like of Barossa, and what impressed you the most, other than your husband Cameron, who I believe you met then?
Yeah, no. Fast forward a few years. So I came back to Oz after that gap year and studied winemaking. And then I kind of flitted off and did vintages sort of all around. Well, as you do when you've just graduated as a winemaker, you sort of go off and just pull hoses wherever you can find a vintage and learn as much as you can in, as short a period as you can. So I did a couple of vintages, one in Mudgee, the New Zealand, Napa. Then I went down to Chile and over to Priorat, and then back to where did I? Oh, then I ended up in France and stayed in the Rhone actually for a year, which was my first sort of formal, I guess, winemaker role. And then so that was a brief kind of dabble in every winemaking around the world. And then from the Rhone, I came home to Two Hands. So I'd had a bit of experience in between. So that's maybe changes the question a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense because, and you would have been working a little bit with Shiraz as well in the Rhone, obviously. So that makes a little bit more sense. And what I mean, did you enjoy working with Shiraz? Was that something that you thought, or Syrah, sorry, you thought that's something when you came back home you wanted to do?
Yeah, and I think having had the experience growing up with, a lot of Shiraz and then working, I worked with Shiraz also in Chile and in Priorat a little bit and in Napa. So the one I worked for did have a reasonable amount of Shiraz there. So I think for me, that was an eye-opener, as much as I love also Grenache, which we work with here in the Barossa, and I did obviously in the Rhone. Shiraz is, I find it just an amazing grape variety. And I think that is why I was so interested in the work in the job at Two Hands, because they're one of their sort of main points of difference was the fact that they made Shiraz from so many different regions. So just to have the opportunity to have a look at Shiraz from Heathcote versus Langhorne Creek, Barossa, McLaren Vale, Clare. It was really interesting to just see all that variety within one grape variety. So yeah, it was a nice way to break back into being in Australia and for want of a better word, settling down, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine that you were in really great hands, which, excuse the pun, to work with so many different styles of Shiraz. What happened when it turned into a decision about what you were going to do for your future? I just imagine that was really difficult, being that you had this family legacy, but then also you were, wanted to be in the Barossa with your husband, I imagine. So how did that all kind of play out that you got the best of both worlds?
Good question. I think, my dad, for one, had always said that as members of our family, if we wanted to come and work back in our winery at Campbells, we needed to go away and get some experience first. So that was the first thing we had to tick off. So I was on my mission to do that and to get as much experience as I could. But then I think that I could see the benefit of being involved with Campbells and also having an avenue for work elsewhere and just an opportunity to see, what was happening in another part of the Australian wine industry. So it kind of worked for me and for Campbell's, being able to work with our current winemaker who was there, back when I was just freshly back in Australia. And so I had a good relationship, and I would be over in Rutherglen tasting and doing, the sort of serious blending sessions over there, and certainly involved with fortified blending, which sort of happened in the summer months where there wasn't a lot happening back in the winery in the Barossa as well. So I kind of could go between the two. And so that was working quite well in the early days. But I think the crunch point came when I met my now husband Cam, and it sort of meant that I may actually have to decide which place I wanted to set up as home base. And perhaps, that was a hard decision to say that I'd live in the Barossa, but work more at Campbell's. And obviously it's really come to a head in the last couple of years. My father passed away just on 3 years ago now. And so with that, we've really, I've had to become a lot more involved with Campbell's, and I've wanted to be more involved, but it's tricky as as time goes on and I get more roots laid down in the Barossa. So it's a challenge, particularly with no direct flights. But it works.
I suppose, like anything, when you have a love for something and you're dedicated, you find a way to make it work, and like you said, it just most of the time it relies on having really, really good teams at both ends. Tell me about your time at Elderton and working with old vines, Command and Helbig. They're amazing old vines. So what's your approach in the vineyard and what's your experience of Elderton?
Yeah, so I started working at LD in 2016 and just in the lab, and that was under our old winemaker, Richard Langford. And then he moved on a few years ago now, so which presented a great opportunity for me to get to know the winery, on a much more sort of serious level as opposed to just being involved. And I guess in sort of taking on more of a role that oversees vineyard and winemaking and not sort of being bogged down so much in the winemaking side only, has allowed me to get out into the vineyard more and just really get to understand these old beauties that we've got because, as you say, Shanteh, the old vines are amazing. And the depth of fruit and flavour that we get from them is just remarkable. We're looking at the moment, we're just looking at wines as they're trickling through Malo, and you can tell the fruit that's come off those old vines, even at the earliest stages that we're at now. They've got a depth of tannin and just a richness that is just completely unique. And so, it's a real honour to work with them. And I think our approach to answer that question in the winery is just to keep it as simple as possible. We like to hold things on skins for a little longer if we can. So we've got some fermenters that are actually new this year that we can seal up the tulips, the cement tulips, which are fantastic and have proved really useful just to help develop that tannin profile without sort of hindering by sort of any further oxidation in ferment. So that's been really helpful. But then also just preserving fruit, hand picking, getting the fruit in and getting it holding it cold as much as we can, and then just letting it do what it does. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? But that's what makes the best wine. Unfortunately, the Helbig block, which is out in Greenock, that's a wine where we don't know quite so well because we've only had that vineyard for sort of 15 years. But that fruit those vines were planted in 1915, and they as well, they're a completely different style of fruit to what we get from our Command fruit, which is in Europe, on the valley floor and the Barossa. So much more nervy tannin and edgy, really soaks up new oak and is quite bold. But we have such a tiny volume of that it's always a bit of a juggle to find the right vessel to put it in. It mostly just ends up in puncheons that we take the heads out of and just plunge for its duration of ferment, and then we just press it off into that oak. So it's just awesome to work with such a variety of fruit. But as I said, just those old vines that just their own individual stamp they put on the wine, the resultant wine is amazing.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I remember still to this day the first time I ever tried the Command wine. I was probably about 24, I would say, working at a little kind of boutique retail store. And I just remember not realizing that wine could be so delicious and intense and just full of flavor. And I still remember because the labels have been, they've got that really iconic label. And still to this day, when I walk past them in a shop, I think about that. I think about like the first time I tried it. So very impressionable wines. And no pressure on you to get them right.
But, no, not at all. No, not feeling that at all. No.
But the Barossa does have a little bit of their Barossa Charter on vines. Can you run us through a little bit about the importance of that for the region?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but that's been great for us as a region. It just helps us understand it, and for want of a better word, categorise, how old is old, because when you talk about old vine in the Barossa, it can be anything from, 40 years of age to 150 years of age and beyond. So to have an idea and just to be able to sort of put a stamp on something and say, look, yes, these are our command vineyards and they're actually ancestor vineyards because they're over 125 years of age. That's great, and it's just a really sort of easy way for people to understand where they fit in and where they sit in the scheme of things. So yeah, so that's a really useful tool, I guess, if you like, for us to explain where our vineyards sit. Yeah,
I think so, and I think for maybe most people know this, I don't know, but the older vines get, the gnarlier they produce usually less fruit, less bunches and more concentrated fruit. So, it's a specialty item, isn't it? Because you can't just keep replicating it. Even if it's your top seller and you sell out every year, you can only make so much of it and you can mess it up, but they do tend to offer you just great fruit to start with, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also, there's a couple of sayings around old vines to say, are they old? Are they good because they're old, or old because they're good? Sorry, I'm coining a phrase that I think my brother-in-law Al likes to use. But and it's a good point though, because in the case of us, I think they're old because they're good. They're not just there because they've just managed to hang out there for that long. They do need their maintenance, and they need and they certainly benefit from all the inputs that we do, and I think that's the really exciting thing, particularly for us in the era that we're in now. Like we've had, the Australian wine industry's had such an amazing sort of few decades of growth, and we as Aussies, I think you touched on it earlier, Shanteh, are really good at just getting stuff done and exploring and using innovation and creating the next best thing. But I think we're really realizing now that it's actually all about us to get the inputs back into the vines and to just give them what they need and listen to them and take it back to them and say, you tell me what you need, and we'll go from there. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing that we're seeing, and we're already kind of seeing the benefits of just really taking. It sounds silly, but just keeping a really close eye on their vine, on our health of all of our vines, particularly our old stuff, but obviously all of our fruit, and giving it exactly what it needs, not overdosing it in fertilizer or anything, just to try and get the biggest crop we can. Just getting that balance right.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we want to keep doing this for a long time. So it's so important that we pay attention and like you said, listen to what's happening on the land that we're so lucky to work with. I want to talk about Campbells, and I hate to say, like, sum it up for me. What are the differences between the two? Because how do you do that in a few paragraphs? So let's talk fortified wines at Campbells. You make some amazing wines there right across the board. The Bobby Burns Shiraz is one of my favorite. But I want to talk about fortifieds just because we were talking about vines and, the beautiful wines that you make at Elderton. But let's talk fortifieds, because a completely different process. Is that a joy for you, or is that painstaking and a pain in the bum for you?
It's amazing for me, particularly because I have the luxury of not having to do the long vintage that goes with it. So I don't have to sort of just wait until they're ready to go, and then finally, when you've just finished everything else, you got to clean the press up and press the muskets and the topex, which is even more sort of touch and go when it gets to that sort of pointy end at the end of harvest. But I'd say hats off to our team in Rutherglen, because they just hang in there and just keep waiting. And we normally have these beautiful long summers and autumns that just carry on. They get cold, so we get those acids don't sort of deteriorate too much, but we just get those lovely dry autumn days. So we do get that raisoning, but still that sort of freshness of fruit in the underneath bunches. So that's a completely different thought process to making a dry red or white table wine for that matter. But it's an absolute joy, and they're just such amazing wines, and they're probably, I think, if I could sum them up, they're almost a bit more honest than a red wine or a table wine. They're sort of what you see, although obviously given it's got age for anywhere from 5 years up to 50 years before you might put it in bottle, but they tell you what they're all about from the early stages. You get they have quite honest flavors, and when you just press something off that you've got something that's amazing that will fit, a rare classification, or something that's really vibrant and fruity that will just slip into a Rutherglen or a classic a classification of fortified. So yeah, so it's a joy, and it's such a nice pleasant change from looking at reds day in, day out during vintage and beyond. So yeah, it's good, and I think having obviously the effect of fortification really muddles the wine for a while. So you sort of do that and pop them away and let them just hang out for sort of 10 months or so, and then you come back to them and they've just turned into these golden or sort of lovely light pink coloured wines. Then it's like, wow, it's just amazing. So they're just on their own sort of path of evolution without requiring too much of us in that time. So yeah,
such living, breathing entities. I have no idea. I mean, just hearing you talk about that, they're quite honest. I've never really looked at muscat off the vine. I can't even imagine it. And the process, I mean, I love fortifieds and apairas and sherries are like one of my favorite things in the world. So I really would love to see the process of, like you said, just even at the start, because the only picture I have is kind of, of soleras and things like that I, diagrams, and it just doesn't do it justice. So I will have to get out there to see the process, because I find it fascinating, and they are the most amazing wines. I mean, I don't think anywhere in the world makes muscat and muscadel like we do. And they can last for so long. So, you don't have to pop a bottle and worry too much how long you're drinking. I know they don't last forever, but they are truly amazing wines. And at Campbell's, you just do such a amazing job. I mean, total awe.
Oh, no, well, I thank my father for that. Absolutely. We're just trying to keep it afloat. But we are, I think we are lucky in that Dad set up a Solera system at Campbell's years ago. So while some fortified producers, particularly in Rutherglen, don't follow a traditional Solera system, they just sort of have an old cask and will bottle up a certain portion of that and make a blend, when they're ready for their next bottling. But we're lucky in that at Campbell's we've got these amazing stocks that we obviously refresh and replenish and maintain, and that takes time, obviously. But our style is for that reason quite unique. It is a wonderful thing to be a part of. But I wholeheartely agree, and with your statement about not needing to drink them all in one sitting. I think if I could do one thing for the fortified wine industry, it would just be to get a bottle of fortified in everybody's household, and they could just sip away at it over time and not rush it, but just have it there, because it's just the most perfect way to finish off an afternoon. I shouldn't say afternoon, I should say evening.
No, you can say afternoon. I totally agree. I think I agree. I would probably, forgo any sweet dessert forever if I could just have a little half glass of muscat or muscadel or sherry or something like that to finish, because I find them so complex. You can have the tiniest sip and have flavors left in your mouth for half an hour later. They're truly just unique. And you see them at wine shows whenever, there's a bunch of wine judges around talking fortifieds. There's a moment where you just see people lost for words, and the scores are just golds all round, and we're all just going like, how does it get any better? So pretty amazing. So what's coming up for you, and what's the plan for the next few years for both wineries, or what are you looking forward to, and what's the next challenge?
Well, I think it would be amazing to just see an ordinary vintage at Campbell's. We've had 2020 we lost all of our red wine through smoke taint, and 2021 was okay. It was a decent vintage. 22 we copped a fair bit of that rain that was all along the eastern seaboard. So we've had a shaky few years over there. So look, I would just love for us to have a bit of normality, which sounds really boring, but that would be awesome. We've got a pretty cool composting program happening over in Rutherglen, and again, just trying to do what we do and do it well. That would be the go for as far as Campbell's is concerned, I think. And in the Barossa, we are doing a fair bit of work in our vineyard this year. We've got a replant. Well, we took out and replanted some old Cabernet Grenache a couple of years ago, and that will just start to come online in its new form, which is cuttings from various Shiraz blocks around the Barossa that we have. So that'll be just getting that up and running this year will be a great project, and then sort of fostering that into its first little cuvee in a year's time. So that is pretty exciting. And we're also reworking a little bit of our command block out here this winter. So there's a fair bit of sort of maintenance-y kind of, just focusing on just looking after what we've got this year. So it probably sounds a bit boring, but that's good for us just to take stock of where we're at and make sure that everything is working as it should be. And I'm hoping maybe to get overseas at some point this year, because we can all of a sudden with this COVID kind of ending. So there may be a little bit of travel somewhere too, but I'm not sure about that. That is maybe just a pipe dream at the moment. But yeah.
I think we're too scared to wish for too much at this stage, aren't we? We're just like, back to normality would be great. But in travel, I agree. We can travel now. It would be really great to do it. But I really hope that you do have some maybe slightly, higher yielding vintages. And like you said, that stock standard where everything kind of, you're not even asking for perfection. You're just asking for a solid year. So I really hope that happens for you.
No, thank you. Yeah, we are. Fingers crossed. I guess that's what we have to do. We're farmers after all, aren't we? So we have to take it. Yeah.
It's true. There is only so much that you can do. I always ask everybody on the podcast, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, Jules, what would your 3 be and why?
Oh, I had a feeling this was coming. And can I add tea in there just as a 4th one, just because?
Totally.
Thank you. So my day wouldn't happen if it wasn't for my cup of tea in the morning, just black tea, with a dash of milk and a tiny dash of honey. That is the day begun for me. So that is a must-have. But then beyond that, I was trying to think about what would it be, and it obviously varies with the season. But I do love white wine. So, and I think something that is just really can sort of be different in different places. It would have to be Chardonnay, because we can have a Chablis-esque, really sort of acid-driven mineral Chardonnay, or a big overblown oaky version, which is also equally delicious in the right scenario. So that would be 1. 2, of course, would have to be Shiraz, because again, it comes in so many different forms. I can have a really bunchy, vibrant one, or like a lovely aged version of something that's more traditional in style. So that would be number 2, and it wouldn't be me without having a fortified in there. But I think for me, my Taupe would be my absolute go-to fortified, something that is, we can't make Taupe every year. It's really it's not like Muscat. It's not sort of so obvious, but just so delicious when it's got a little bit of age on it. And so probably just a classic Taupe is something that I have on the shelf at all times. So there you go. That's my theory.
Oh, I completely understand. Like, I really love Muscat. I love the red berry flavors you get in Muscat, but Taupe is just, they call it liquid gold for a reason, right? I think you guys coined that. I don't know if it was, but you guys that coined that phrase, but it is just something otherworldly. And, I agree. It is something that was created somewhere else in a different landscape, and we're just lucky to be able to consume it. I totally agree.
Just enjoy it. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, excellent choices. Jules, it's been a pleasure getting to know you more and hear about your passion for what you do. I was thinking about you the other day, and I was thinking what it would be like to be making wine in 2 different regions, and especially in the last few years, and how hard it is to travel. And I came across a quote from Pablo Casal, who's a Spanish cellist, and I thought it was kind of fitting, maybe more for the state of the world, but also maybe for you as well. And he said, "The love of one's country is a splendid thing, but why should love stop at the border?" And I really felt that connection that you have with what you've talked about in the two regions. And I think it's a good reminder that we really live in the lucky country. We have so many amazing wine regions, and hats off to you for being able to do what you do. And I like that you've kind of made it work for you, because why should we just say, no, I have to choose one when you can have access to both? So good on you. And I hope that we get to chat again sometime soon, hopefully in person.
Shanteh, that would be awesome. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been lovely. And yeah, look, as I said, I couldn't do what I do without a great team, and maybe I'm just greedy, but hey, it's fun. And I'm in total agreement, though. We do live in a lucky country, no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Jules, and cheers to you.
Cheers. Bye.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.